Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. We appreciate you taking time with us. My name is Sherry Sullivan, and I am a marketing manager with the AWS team here in Seattle, and I'm pleased to host today's webinar. Today you'll hear from AWS and Proterra Technologies, one of our advanced consulting partners, who will share their expertise on running SAP all-in-one ERP production systems deployment on AWS. Before we get started, I'd like to just run through a couple of housekeeping items. The duration of today's webinar will be approximately 1 hour, and your lines have been muted. However, you do have the opportunity to ask questions anytime during the webinar using the Q&A function in your browser. I'd also like to remind you that this content will be available. We'll send you a link after this webinar, and you also have the opportunity to find our content on SlideShare as well as YouTube. We are recording today's session, and before we begin, I'd like to just review what we'll cover today. We'll talk about the AWS and SAP platform overview, as well as use cases on AWS. And then we'll move into the deployment overview, where Proterra will show a Merrifield case study and talk about operational and cost benefits. So without further delay, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Jones, who is our Senior SAP Solutions Architect with Amazon Web Services, as well as Patrick Osterhaus, who is President of Proterra Technologies. Without further delay, I'll turn it over to you, Steve, to take over.
Thank you, Sherry. Appreciate the introduction. And folks, welcome today to the webinar. First off, I'd like to spend a little bit of time setting context for the discussion today. The reason you're on the call today is likely due to the fact that you've been asked to research opportunities either to streamline existing operations for your business or to research new possibilities for hosting your key applications. Now, we all know that managing infrastructure elements that go underneath a critical business or enterprise application like SAP really comes with a lot of complexity. There's servers, storage, data center space, power, networking, and all the other infrastructure elements and components that require really a significant amount of time and investment to manage. So it's no surprise that most organizations spend a large portion of their IT budgets just keeping the lights on. In fact, Gartner estimates that the average IT department spends about 80% of its time and resources just maintaining existing systems. So we at AWS really feel that cloud computing is a better way to run your business. The cloud really helps companies of all sizes become more agile, and you'll hear specific examples from Patrick just in a little bit. Instead of running your applications yourself, you can run them on the cloud where IT infrastructure is offered as a service, like a utility. With the cloud, your company saves money. There's no upfront capital expenses that you would normally have as you buy hardware for projects. There's the massive scale and fast pace of innovation of the cloud that also drives costs down for you. And on the AWS platform, you'll only pay for what you use, just like you do electricity. So not only can the AWS platform rapidly speed up the time it takes to provision new environments, like SAP, because you don't have to wait for servers to arrive, the elastic nature of the platform makes it easy to scale up and down as needed. Patrick will also cover that in a bit. So at the end of the day, you'll have resources, both people and money, left for innovation, which allows you to focus on projects that really can impact your business, like building and deploying more applications. So why Amazon Web Services? Well, technology innovation has always driven the growth of Amazon.com, which most of you are familiar with. As Amazon expanded its product offerings for its retail customers, we also expanded into other customer segments. And after over a decade of building and running a highly scalable web application, which you know as Amazon.com, we realized that we had developed a core competency in operating technology infrastructure at massive scale. And so we embarked on a much broader offering to deliver that that know-how and that expertise to your customers in a platform of services that you can use to operate your own key businesses and applications, very similar to what we do. So if we take a little closer look at some of the components that make up the AWS platform, we've got a slide here that kind of shows all the various components. At the bottom, you'll see the infrastructure layer that we make available in a virtualized manner. We'll talk a little bit more about regions and availability zones in just a bit. Immediately above that, there are 4 major building blocks that comprise what most people think of when they think of AWS. And those are the actual compute, storage, and relational database services. And then within the next several layers, you'll see various value-add services which are available in piecemeal fashion. Of course, you can choose which of these services to use. You can use all of them or just a combination of them, but the real point is that whatever your application needs, and SAP in this case, you can choose to use which of these services in whatever amount. We don't necessarily force you to use a specific component or service. And the great thing about the AWS platform is that, again, you just pay for what you use. You turn it off and you stop paying. Let's talk a little bit about our footprint. We're steadily expanding our global infrastructure to help customers achieve lower latency and higher throughput. We have 4 regions in the U.S., including what we call GovCloud, which is a region designed to allow U.S. government agencies and contractors to move more sensitive workloads into the cloud. And we also have a region in Europe, 2 more in Asia Pacific, and 1 more in South America. I've also noted here what we call edge locations, which are locations where our cloud delivery network service called CloudFront and our DNS service called Route 53 are also available, to help deliver lower latency experiences for customers. And of course, as our customers grow their businesses, we'll continue to provide infrastructure that meets global demand. So I mentioned that we talk a little bit about regions and availability zones. You can think of regions basically as essentially separate clouds. There's total isolation between regions, and even the control plane, which is used to operate resources within a particular region, is not shared. And there are technical reasons for this, such as latency challenges. As you can imagine, if we attempted to synchronize one region in Singapore or Asia and another one here in the U.S., that would be a little bit difficult. But the real reason is compliance. You can be assured that when you put data into a region, it's going to stay there unless you move it. And that's a promise because it's important for regulatory reasons. Now, the only exceptions to that are if you use, again, the CloudFront or Route 53, those other services. And these services are designed to distribute files and records to edge points around the globe. So the data that you deploy to those services will leave the region. Now, again, within a region, we have this concept of what we call availability zones. Now, people commonly use the term availability zone to refer to separate data centers, but even in availability zones sometimes can be made up of multiple data centers. The thing to remember is that within each distinct availability zone, there's fault isolation involved. And each availability zone is the same general metro area for latency reasons. However, they're far enough apart that there is a share as little as possible principle. That is, where practical, each availability zone has separate power utilities or at least separate distribution trunks, network connections. We'll put them on different floodplains and so forth. Now, this amount of separation varies according to geography, but the idea is that you can now take advantage of all this work that we've put into building these regions and availability zones to build always-on applications, including SAP. So we really do the heavy lifting when it comes to building out the infrastructure portion. I won't take a lot of time to delve into security. We have complete webinars devoted to the topic. But suffices to say, we take security seriously and have gone to great lengths to provide a secure and stable platform where you can feel comfortable operating your key business-critical applications like SAP. And specific details for many of these certifications that I've listed here can be found on our website, and I'd encourage you to go take a look. Now, many companies who run their applications on us find that they're actually able to leverage these certifications for audit compliance in their own companies. Let's quickly talk about the 3 main building blocks typically used in an SAP environment. We saw those on an earlier slide. First, there's the EC2 platform. Basically, this is virtual computers, or what we call instances, with a big twist. Here you're able to obtain and boot new server instances in minutes. You can quickly scale up or down capacity, and you also have the ability to create a library of images for various scenarios. We see a lot of SAP customers provision quickly these servers or these instances, install their SAP application, and then create, again, an image or library which they can use to create additional systems for maybe applying enhancement packs or regression testing or things of that nature. So it's very, very scalable and very elastic. Next, we have Amazon EBS, which is our elastic block store. This is a persistent storage service. These storage volumes can be provisioned in basically any size that you want. It can be attached to the instances that you provision. These volumes will these are persistent. It's so far to say that if you shut down your instance and you start it back up, the data that is on these volumes will be available to those instances again. And then there is Amazon S3. Amazon S3 is a simple object store designed for, we use it in the SAP environment mostly for backups and snapshots of the EBS volumes. This is a very durable, it's 11 nines of durability, very durable service. The data stored there automatically gets copied into, again, the multiple availability zones within a particular region. So AWS has an enterprise security model that operates very much the way you'd expect an enterprise network to behave. We have this notion of Amazon Virtual Private Cloud, or VPC, and with this you're able to basically electronically isolate all of your servers into a virtual private network with multiple subnets. You can even choose an option to ensure that no other virtual machines run on the same physical underlying hardware if you so choose. Now, Amazon VPC enables you, again, to provision a private isolated section, and the key here is that you're in control. You get to control the IP address range, the CIDR block, all the subnets, network and firewall rules, things that you're normally used to maintaining and controlling in your own on-premise world. As a best practice, we recommend using VPC, and especially for production environments, it's required for SAP productive support. Now, there are many SAP use cases on AWS. We see our customers doing lots of interesting and creative things. I mentioned earlier how customers will create images or libraries of images that they will use to deploy additional systems, whether sandbox, prototyping, trial systems. It's a very good use case for the AWS platform. And we also see quite a few customers using the platform for disaster recovery. There was a previous webinar done by Patrick just recently, and encourage you to go out there and look at a real live customer example of disaster recovery on AWS for an SAP ECC platform or installation. We see a number of customers migrating their legacy or compliance systems. Typically, these systems are just kept around for regulatory or reporting purposes, and the hardware that they run on is typically aging. So we'll see people move these and basically, spin these things up when they need them and then shut them down when they don't to stop paying for them. There are a myriad of other use cases, single solutions. There's business objects, which is available on our AWS Marketplace, along with Afaria, and then there's other services from SAP called RDS, which are also available. And then, of course, you can choose to host which portions of your SAP environment, whether dev, test, or production. I'll give you a couple examples, and then I'd like to get to Patrick from Patera so that you can also hear of the A1 customer that has recently moved to the AWS platform. But just to give you an idea, we had a global cosmetics company. It was very large. They sell products in more than 135 countries and territories. They had an existing SAP training and prototyping landscape. It was hosted on Unix. And it was becoming too expensive, and it just wasn't flexible for them. So what they did is, with the help of a partner, they migrated that existing landscape again to AWS. It was about 35 plus systems and 30 terabytes of data. And in the end, it was about a 36% reduction in cost compared to their traditional physical Unix infrastructure. So they were definitely quite happy. Patrick will talk to you in just a moment about the A1 Customer. There have been recently quite a few customers that have come on board with the A1 platform. We also have an interesting use case, was just or case study was just made available on our website, which I'll point you to in a minute. But this company is running their entire SAP non-productive environment, dev and QA, on AWS. And then SAP themselves are a very big user. One of their biggest use cases is again to use us for training environments. I've listed here an example where, 1 week they stood up 130 systems in parallel, one each dedicated for each student, so that they could do that in a quick and flexible manner. So just what solutions are certified for production on AWS? I've listed them here. There's the business objects, the business intelligence solutions. There's the rapid deployment solutions. And then recently this year at Sapphire, we announced the SAP Business All-in-One Platform and Afaria. I mentioned the resource page on the AWS site. It's aws.amazon.com/SAP. There's a myriad of white papers, SAP notes, and other important information that I recommend that you have a quick look at. And with that, I'll turn it over to Patrick, President of Proterra Technologies, to talk a little bit about the strategic partnership we have with each other, and also some of the experiences they've had with a particular customer, Merrifield.
Thank you, Stephen. As the slide has there, it's my name, Patrick Osterhaus. I'm President of Proterra Technologies, and going to go through just a little overview of Proterra, and then we'll jump right into the content with the slides here for today to talk about Merrifield. So a little bit about our background. Proterra has been in business since 1998. Since the beginning, we've been focused purely on SAP, and over the years, we've added our certifications to include AMS, or Application Management Services, and then hosting, and now most recently, a couple years ago, in cloud. And we focus, as I say, specifically on SAP and the suite of products that support SAP. So we bring a solution where we'll do the full support and the advice and architecture for creating an SAP solution in AWS. We also provide services on the peripheral of the satellite of SAP systems, including BobJ and Exchange, Citrix, and full IT outsourcing in a whole. So when we talk about SAP deployment options, in the past, the typical model has been that we look at an on-premise data center where a customer will own their hardware and the software, and they'll manage it fully. As we evolved in IT, we started to use outsourced data centers. We started using partners that have specific niche areas of expertise where they can bring it to bear to provide solutions for the hardware, for SAP solutions, and even custom building infrastructure if it's for interfaces or third-party products to integrate that into the solution. In most recent years, we started seeing some advances with how the services are delivered to the customer, including virtualization. So now we take care of some advantages of rapid provisioning, taking advantage of some scalability, and using a little more of our hardware, getting more cost effectiveness of using multiple VMs on one server. So that's been a revolution that a lot of customers are doing themselves, and they're seeing cost savings and improved efficiencies there. What we want to focus on today is this new platform. Again, it's a new revolution in IT where we are looking at the AWS, or what's also commonly known as the Amazon Web Services, where we can bring the advantages of that platform which is inherent in the solution, and how can we apply that to the SAP service stack. And so we'll talk a little more about that here in the next coming slides. Let's take a little step back on the certification for SAP. What does it take to run SAP in production for AWS? The first primary requirement here is to bring your own license model. So everything with the procurement of the SAP software licensing is still the same. So you would go through the licensing for SAP, each solution on its own, including the database if you prefer. And then the instances that are certified for AW use by SAP are two specific sizes for production. There's M2.2x large and M2.4x large. When we talk about an instance, as Stephen was mentioning before, that is a collection of RAM and CPU. That is the compute portion of the cloud solution. So there's essentially three pieces of the cloud solution. There's the compute portion, the storage portion, and then also the networking portion. Right here specifically we're talking about the compute portion. So those instances, they have to be used for the certification for production. For other instances, they can be used for non-production. So if you have a smaller dev system or a training system, we can use that in a smaller set of CPU and RAM and size it a little more appropriately. But SAP has certified just two sizes, and more of that information is available on that page that Stephen referred to earlier, which is pretty much the one link you want to bookmark and you can come back to because it has the OSS note and collection of information for running SAP on AWS. Everyone on the call is probably aware of SAPs. Essentially, it's the metric that we size SAP systems for. That was a key component to the SAP certification for AWS. And that note is referenced here for more information on the quick sizer for AWS. So jumping back after the certification and those requirements, we have a listing again, as Stephen referred to earlier, about the RDS solution that's ready for deployment scenarios. Those are solutions that are for CRM specific or BobJ, where you can deploy the solution very quickly. And that solution fits very well into the AWS model, where you can do a prototype and go to production within days or weeks at a time. So those two platforms have been certified by SAP, as well as the all-in-one platform, which we'll talk to more specifically here today. The all-in-one platform, if you're not familiar with that term, you can think of that as an ECC system. So your core, what used to be R3 or Enterprise, that is the product that's been certified by SAP. And then lastly, the Afaria product, which the Afaria product is getting into the mobile space. Some companies on the call here probably have experienced this already. It's a newer technology. It was part of the purchase of Sybase a couple years from SAP, and so the Afaria product can be used for mobile data management. And we'll talk a little more about that here in the slides coming up. So the typical use cases. This is sort of a repeat for what Stephen mentioned previously, yet it's an important part to the presentation. It's really important specifically for Merrifield because they actually use 3 of the 4 solutions today. So foremost, that production landscape. We talked about that now. Obviously, you want to go through the certification requirements, which is listed in that note in the website. But what does that mean? The big advantages here is you get no CapEx outlay. You're not buying servers and hardware and all that infrastructure that typically you've had to spend money on, including the data center. All that is part of the AWS platform. So you basically pay in a utility model for what you use. Back to Stephen's analogy where you're paying like the electric bill, where you're paying when the systems are on. When that light switch is on, that's what you're paying for. So very big advantage. This is the typical use case that we're going to see more and more of, especially this example today for this customer and what they've seen as advantages for running production. And we're going to go into more detail on this specifically in this presentation. We also have the hybrid model. You guys are probably very familiar with hybrid technology in cars. When we talk about in cloud space, what we're talking about is mixture of a cloud system with an on-premise system with possibly another cloud platform. So it's basically a mixture that you're running environments over more than one environment. We're going to see this more and more. I see this is going to be one of the areas where companies will experiment. They're going to run a demo system or sandbox system in the cloud, see how it works. It's very good for testing. The important parts, which, again, we're going to talk to more in detail in a few minutes, is what does that mean from an infrastructure standpoint or a solution? What do you have to do and plan for when you're going to run it in hybrid? So we're going to consider that. And this was a key part to the SAP certification, which SAP worked with Amazon, and Proterra was part of that effort to get the certification done of the AWS platform for running SAP. This was a key point, and we're going to talk more in detail in a few slides about all the aspects of hybrid and what was tested. And then we also have non-production instances, which we've talked about already. We'll go into more detail. The on-demand test, dev, sandbox, and training instances. This is a very good place where a company can test out, see what AWS can do with an SAP system, and we'll go into the details on the advantages there. And then lastly, the disaster recovery. This is a very exciting area. As Stephen mentioned, we have a webinar on this area specifically. This is an area that we can pretty much plug in almost all systems that a current customer has running productive already, and we can look at disaster recovery for them. So there's a lot of advantages to doing this in AWS, and we have a full webinar just dedicated on that topic. So I encourage you to take a look at that and sign up for the next time that's offered. And advance to the next slides, catching up. So let's talk about the company we're here for today. It's Merrifield Garden Center, a company that's been around for over 40 years, and they, as their name says, is specialized in gardening. They're located near Washington, D.C. in Merrifield, Virginia, and they had quite a few challenges with their computing for the last few years, and they were looking for a better solution. So a few years ago, they agreed upon SAP would be their next platform that they would re-implement under. They had a legacy ERP system, which they had outages with. They had recurring high network costs to support the environment. They had issues with remote accessibility with the environment. They're also trying to gear up for the next wave of computing. They're very interested in mobility. They have multiple garden centers, and they have their associates will go out, and they have a point-of-sale system that they wanted to hook up to an ERP system, and they wanted to have mobile devices to be able to help with doing the point-of-sale function directly to ERP. So they were ready for the next wave, and when they came looking for the next technology, we recommended that they look at AWS. So with the seasonal demands of the business, they're heavily dependent upon a couple points of the year. Obviously, the spring season is a big time, and also in November, December with the holidays, they have big demand. So they wanted to ensure the new solution would be able to handle peak demands, but also not only handle that peak demand from a performance standpoint, but also how could they right size and have the right solution through the rest of the year. So some really interesting requirements, and that's what brought us to thinking about the new technologies, including AWS, and what the best fit was. So a little bit about their landscape. We talked about all-in-one. They have the most recent version, ECC 6.0, Enhancement Package 4. Their platform is SQL Server running on Windows 2008, and right now they have about 100 users concurrent. They're looking at, obviously that will grow, they're adding garden centers, so another big key driver for the business is they want to be able to scale it. So just to reiterate, strong seasonal peaks of activity. They wanted to control the costs in footprint going forward. And obviously they need to have strong 7x24 support with fixed cost SLA. So those are the key drivers. A little bit about the overview of the infrastructure and the deployment is they have 3 locations currently. They're adding a 4th. They have the Merrifield, Virginia is their headquarters, and they have 2 other garden centers. Those are connected currently, which Stephen referred to as the VPC, the Virtual Private Cloud. That connection is what connects them to their AWS platform from Amazon. So they have a separate VLAN specifically. If you look at the slide here, you could picture one of those squares there in the AWS cloud is their separate VLAN. One of the areas that they're looking to add in the future will be DR. So they'll provide a DR solution within another zone of AWS, which Stephen referred to earlier, where within even a region, there's multiple data centers. So we recommend that you would do DR over another region in total. So that's an area that they're going to be rolling out here in the next few months that we'll be looking at. But to reiterate, the important thing on the slide here is key users. They have distributed users in each of the locations, and there's a VPN site-to-site currently between each of the sites. So they have a primary and a backup primary and backup VPN site-to-site that's going to connect to AWS. So one of the key features that Merfield enjoyed right away on the implementation was the production landscape build. Again, there's zero IT infrastructure footprint. So the traditional model would require you to build out what you're going to size the system to run at in 5 years, because you're going to look at a lease or a buy to have that hardware sitting on the data center for 5-year time. So you're going to size out that infrastructure for a 5-year period, where it possibly could be, maybe you're running a fifth of that now, where you're doing a wave implementation. So typical scenario is going to be very expensive. You're going to be outlaying a lot of cash right away to buy the hardware, the networking equipment, the data center footprint, and the resources to support that. Whereas in this implementation, they had a go-live date. Originally, it was planned that they were going to start, with a certain date, and they pushed that date back a couple months. And the advantage they reaped right away is they didn't have to pay for their footprint of the infrastructure for 2 months while the systems were sitting idle. So we built the systems, we quiesced them, shut them down for a couple months until the implementation team was ready to start with them. So again, this graphic showing typically you're going to have a 2 or 3 year time to recoup your investment. In AWS, you're going to get that return on investment much faster, and you're going to save on the capital expenditures because you're not buying that equipment right the first day. The other key part here is Merfield had existing systems that were running with us, with Proterra, that they wanted to integrate and not move right away because they were doing a full implementation. So they had the dev systems and test systems already running in one of our data centers. So we started building production in AWS, and we looked at connecting all those systems within one landscape. So their product of AWS, all-in-one on AWS, was built with VPN connections. So if you look at this first line here on the top, we integrate the dev, test, and quality and production systems all into one landscape. So for the end user, they have no visibility and no effect of those systems running in different locations. All the functionality that's required for each of those systems with change management, if you're familiar with TMS and SAP, all that works in a multi-zone or multi-data center or cloud hybrid model just fine. And we're going to talk more in detail about hybrid and what the challenges were and how that was overcome. This is a key part that SAP focused on. And what we found with doing the testing is essentially the deployment added no time for adding that system in AWS over if it was an on-premise system. So we'll go in more detail. There's a slide later that goes in that much more. Another key part here in the solution that Merfield was very interested in is the non-production instances. We're moving those systems over now to AWS, and one of the key advantages they're reaping right away is that they can size and scale those systems up and down as needed. With the dev, quality, sandbox, and training systems, those systems a lot of times can be shut down on off hours. In the AWS, that's with the utility model, it's very easy. We can schedule the systems to come down at 5 p.m. on weekdays and have them down over the weekends, and then we're saving on those resource costs and making more efficient use of the platform. So it's definitely an option that they were excited to utilize for their non-production systems. And you can think about a training system. Most companies will only have a requirement for training maybe 2 months out of the year if they're going to be doing a new implementation or a phased rollout. So it's a much more efficient utilization of the resources for non-prod. So key benefits on cost for Merfield that they looked at, again, the no CapEx up front, so no hardware, software, no real estate allocation in the data center and conserving the capital. The pay for cost of services, again, that compute, the storage, and the networking services are pay as you go, and then the consumption of services as needed. The rapid and on-demand provisioning of resources was a key part. So again, we built those systems up, we quiesced them, and they gave us the heads up on a Friday that they wanted to start that next Monday, and we had them up within minutes. So very quick, reduced cycle times for implementation. And a key part to this is that cycle times, if you ever had the requirement where you want to copy a system, that can essentially be done in minutes, where AWS's platform utilizes key functionality that's similar to other virtualization products where you can snapshot a system very quickly. So we can use that for milestones. If a company, Merrifield has requested us already that they want to make a copy of production so they can test a group of changes without affecting production, we can do that in a matter of minutes. So we can have a test system up and ready for execution of testing. And then the big part, and this is the area that Merrifield was very excited right away to take advantage of, is the reduction of networking resources. So as Stephen mentioned before, there's many choices of locations that you can put your platform in AWS. So obviously there's considerations with DR and latency of where you best would put that system. But the other part that was a key part to AWS was the advanced technology of networking. AWS was built upon the Amazon.com platform, and one of the key strengths obviously is the networking. They're amongst one of the best e-commerce platforms, and the maturity of the networking solution is amongst the best. So Merrifield has been able to utilize the VPN services in their own networking equipment from all their locations, and they got rid of dedicated circuits from telecom providers. And this is a tremendous cost savings monthly for each of those locations, and it's been a better service for them. So that was a tremendous savings right from day one, where they were able to change how they connected to their production system. Talked a lot about ideas so far. Here's some facts here. There was an outside group of VMS that's based in Germany, and they focus their company on doing audits and measurement of how a company can best run SAP. So they definitely know the business of SAP, and they did a study of running on-premise versus AWS for SAP. And you can see some startling numbers there of looking at the cost savings of running on-premise versus AWS. And the link is here. I welcome you to look at that at your own leisure. It's quite a long report, and it's very detail-oriented, so a lot of good information there. So some hard numbers about the cost savings. One of the key parts, obviously cost savings is very, very important. Another key consideration when you're looking at running SAP on AWS for your company is how is it going to operate. Obviously, key that you don't lose functionality, and even more importantly, what are some of the key benefits that maybe you can now take advantage of that you couldn't before? So let's focus a little bit on these areas. The first part is the improved landscape management. Again, we go back to that core functionality of the AWS platform where it can quickly do system copies. We can quickly do a milestone of production and snap that off, and we'll have that for a restore just in case or more testing. We can do that within minutes. You can also do quick system refreshes of the training system. So you might have an image. Companies typically will do client copies to refresh their training environment. Even better, you could do a full system restore. So you can take a previous copy of training and bring it back from a snapshot, and you have a whole system refreshed for you. So you could do this on a weekly basis if you have new training classes coming in every week. The other key advantage here is advanced storage. As Stephen mentioned before, there's essentially different tiers of storage, different types. The EBS storage would be typically, you could think of that as either file systems or disk for the SAP, or I should say drives for an SAP system. It's a very resilient solution for storage. And also the other nice technology of S3, where you can do snapshots. When you do the snapshot of the EBS, it replicates that data to S3. And so you can replicate that to a zone, and then that's going over multiple data centers. So you get the protection of it not being just in one location, but in multiple. The key part here, which we haven't talked much about, which is very, very important to Merrifield, is the capacity bursting. This is one of the areas I think SAP will continue to develop more technologies to use this innovation, is the ability to, on demand, burst CPU and memory. One of the things that we Proterra have built into the solution for Merrifield is we have automatic monitors into the environment for SAP. And there's a technology called CloudWatch that Amazon or AWS utilizes. You can tap into CloudWatch. We can see when a system is going to higher usage for CPU and memory, and we can automatically provision a new instance. So we'll add that into the capacity of the system right away. So within a few minutes, we see the system getting highly loaded. We can provision more additional resources automatically. And right now, as a standard, we do not deprovision. For people who know SAP, it's a little harder to automatically deprovision an instance, being that a job could run there or you might shut off users. So we have manual intervention whenever we'll watch the system, keep an eye on it, and then we'll deprovision those instances manually. But it's a key feature where you can essentially add multiple instances very, very quickly within minutes in the system. It's a very, very nice feature. And lastly, probably a quite overlooked place for many reviewers of AWS, but I think it's one of the very strong points of the certifications that AWS brings to bear. These are certifications that internally you're going to spend a lot of time getting audited, a lot of money from your company to get these certifications. This is a handful of what AWS already has. They have data centers that are up to the toughest security compliance for the Department of Defense and the military. So they have very, very good certifications behind them that you can be assured that the security of the platform is right and it's proper for your environment. So again, a slide here about that bursting, where we can look at for Merrifield, where we have the heavy months of March and April, where we'll add additional resources around usually we see the end of February is when we'll add the resources, and we'll keep those throughout those peak periods and in the holidays. So typically with your typical solution on-premise, traditional solution, you'll have that red line where you're always going to provision for the peak load. So you're going to right-size the environment so that the 80% of the time when you don't need that peak load, you're not running at that additional size. Well, let's go into the operational benefits here, additional operational benefits. So the one big consideration we get from our customers when looking at AWS is the networking. And is it going to be secure enough? Is it going to be complicated enough to handle, is it going to be advanced enough to handle the more complicated requirements of networking? And what we can confidently say is for all the requirements that we've had for any on-premise system for SAP, we've been able to recreate that exactly within AWS. So here's some of the areas that you would typically run. You'd have a physical firewall, physical router, all these connections with a physical switch. All these can be recreated in the AWS environment through the AWS portal. So you have the concept of VLANs, virtual LAN, where you're going to separate your data for your company. That concept exists. The subnetting, you can create a DMZ where you can have that traffic segregated for traffic and services that are going to be exposed to the internet. You can provide that also. They have load balancers. You can restrict on ports or IPs. So essentially bring your toughest challenge, in AWS has been able to solve it for the SAP systems. And this is, again, all these areas were key areas of the SAP certification. SAP looked at this within AWS and within the hybrid models to ensure that all these complicated requirements for very large SAP companies could be serviced, and they were happy with the results. I think one of the key benefits that Merrifield's looking at, very excited, and I think it's a key area that AWS brings to bear advantages over on-premise solution, is with mobility. Again, that vast networking capacity, numerous carriers, it's in my field, one of the best platforms that you can put a mobile solution on. So they're excited to look at the Sybase SUP and Afaria solutions, starting testing in those areas. And we have those running for other customers already. Interface and output, this is an area we get a lot of questions with. This works just as any on-premise solution. We utilize a lot of fax services that are web services already. Printing would be either through you'd have the print spooler either in AWS, or traditionally we would put that print spooler closer to where that print traffic is going to occur. So that obviously we want to have a secure channel between AWS and the on-premise location. And so far we've been able to recreate all print requirements with AWS. And obviously a key part, very important to size and plan appropriately, is the interfaces. Merrifield had requirements where they have interfaces from their point-of-sale systems from their locations. So that traffic had to be sized and ensure that it could go over the VPN site-to-site with latency considered and the sizes of the pipe. that it could be serviced quick enough. And so numerous tests, a lot of testing was done on that, and it all were very successful. And lastly, transport management. This is obviously very important when you can do a transport and dev, either in an on-premise or if it's in AWS. You got to be able to take that transport and development, move it into quality, and then test in quality and with production. So all these were key parts of the certification, and there's a white paper on these areas specifically for any additional steps or different steps that are done in the setup for AWS specific. That's done back on that white paper on that link that Stephen shared earlier. One of our final slides here is the importance of that connectivity. That's an area that is very important to start considering right away, of how the systems for on-premise and other corporate locations are going to be connected to AWS. And there's multiple options. Again, that VPC, as Stephen mentioned, is a requirement. That is what enables the advanced functionality for networking in AWS. So we have the VPN connectivity, and we have AWS Direct Connect. That's where you would bring a telecom provider, and that would directly connect into the AWS data center where your servers are located. So many options. This is an area that with any implementation, not just AWS, but it requires a lot of time and planning and ensuring the sizing is done appropriately. And that's an area that we do right away from implementation. So one of the last thoughts I'd like to share with you is that AWS is a proven platform, not only for the non-production systems, which have been running for years, but also for production. And that's an area that we feel very confident as a company that we will put SLAs for uptime and performance and sign a contract with the customer that AWS is running proficient and sufficient enough for a customer's data. So these are areas that we're going to be looking at: the connectivity, making sure that security, it's not only secure enough, but it's resilient enough where it's going to be up for SAP productive use. Another big part is synchronization. Those important parts of RTO and RPO, which is important in DR, and also with your interfaces, you got to be able to have quick synchronization of file transfers. So that's something that we stand by. Obviously, the management services are critical, so we got to be able to stand behind the product and understand that everything that runs on an on-premise solution is up to snuff, and AWS will run just as good or better. And then just the last part is the all-inclusive services. Our services, we do a monthly fixed cost in a utility model, so you pay as you go. And again, it's something that we say it's ready for production, so we have our contract stand behind that. The last thought I have here is a fun one for anyone that is coming to SAP Tech Ed here next week. AWS and Proterra will be hosting an event. We would love to see you in person, and we'd love to have you try to stump us with any questions you got. We'd love to talk through your solution in more detail, and we can talk about AWS in more detail. So if you are going to SAP Tech Ed, if you can write down that email and send Christian on the Proterra team an email, we'll make sure that you get the details of where the event's going to be. It's one not to be missed. It's a very, very nice event. So just wanted to offer that as a last slide here, and then we have some time, I think, for questions. So I know we have some questions in the Q&A area, so we can get to those. Sherry, I'll turn it back to you.
Terrific. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you, Stephen, for today's presentation. We do have time for a couple of questions, and if you haven't taken the moment to include those, please feel free to do so now. And we'll start off with a question I'll direct to you, Steve. Can you speak to how does AWS integrate with on-prem resources?
You bet. So we talked a little bit about the Amazon Virtual Private Cloud. Typically what we'll see customers do is provision, again, a virtual private cloud or VPC, which basically becomes an extension of their data center. And they can use already existing internal IP address ranges that they use, again, on their own corporate network, or they can use another one within the VPC if they like. But the idea here is that the VPC just becomes an extension. So any management functions or other applications that need to talk to the resources that are on the AWS platform or in the cloud would function just like they're in the next room, since they're basically part of the same network. So it's very very easy to integrate. Again, there are two options to do that. One is using a VPN tunnel over the internet, or using what we call our Direct Connect service, which again allows you to provision a telco line with the provider of your choice, and then do a connection into our data center.
Great, thank you for that response. The next question I'll direct back to you, Patrick. Can you speak to how does SAP pertain to scalability when it comes to the seasonal demand? Specifically, in your Merrifield case, can you articulate how that was able to be scaled?
Sure can. So in the Merrifield example, what we have done is we have already built instances, app servers, that would be quickly provisioned. So essentially, the Merrifield instances, we have 5 already built, ready to run. So 80% of the time we'll have a couple app servers running, and then we have an additional 5 that are ready for deployment upon triggers that we're monitoring the load of the system as whole. When we see those triggers come in, we automatically have those other 5 instances. Depending upon load, it'll be 1 up to 5 will automatically start. And so for users that are familiar with SAP load balancing, it adds those instances automatically to the load group. So batch processors or background processors are automatically going to start using those other instances, as well as dialog or logged on users will start using those instances. So with those automatically starting up, the SAP is smart enough to start balancing and using the additional resources, so the users continues to have very good environment to operate in, and they don't see any degradation in performance.
Great, thank you. And Patrick, I'll direct this question again to you. Can you share the various scenarios that Merrifield has used when it comes to printing?
Sure can. So Merrifield has used, obviously, probably the most popular choice is a lot of HP printers. We see that in a lot of customers where they have laser print. They'll have that at the point of sale locations where they're printing out invoices. They'll also have pre-printed labels, and also for folks familiar with barcodes, the Zebra printers. So a lot of different types of print, and also we also have mass print that we typically would do overnight. That's just for their schedule of when they would print out their mass print. So we have scenarios where we use print pools where we'll send print over to a printer pool. So we'll have multiple printers in that pool that could print the mass print, as well as the Zebra printers, which are more on demand throughout the day. So what we see, we've sized per the number of users, looking at the growth in the average size of print. We've sized it where they're going to be able to handle the next garden center, for the future growth. And all that traffic is obviously over a secure private tunnel through that VPN site to site. So none of it's going to the internet. Nothing's exposed to the internet.
Great, thank you for clarifying. And I think we have time for one additional question. Patrick, I'll target you for this one as well. Can you speak to how do remote users access the production system using AWS?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. That's been a key area for a lot of companies looking at SAP in general. So our typical default scenario or recommendation would be that users would remotely connect into their corporate network, and then they would tunnel over either the VPN site to site or over to a dedicated circuit. That's our traditional model for on-premise. One of the things that Merrifield wanted to look at is they wanted to get out of the business of managing the networking services. So they wanted to look at how could they also add remote users to come directly into the AWS cloud. So utilizing the VPC technology, we also have a client-based SSL solution where the Merrifield users can log directly into their private VLAN in AWS. So wherever they're at traveling in the world, they can use an SSL secure VPN tunnel from their tablet. They actually are using Android. They have some iPhones and iPads where they're tunneling directly from their device, be it desktop, laptop, or mobile device, directly into the SAP system in AWS. So it's a combination of both the site-to-site for people that are at the locations, or if they're traveling or remote working from home, they can access that through an SSL VPN, which is a client-based product.
Great. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank Patrick and Stephen for your time today. And that will conclude today's webinar. And I'd like to remind you that we will send a link to this recording. And on behalf of Amazon Web Services team and our presenters today, thank you for joining us to learn about running SAP A1 systems on the AWS cloud. Thank you.